Namaste. Hello, I'm Sonali Gokte and I'm reading from my mystery novel, The Ripple Effect. I'm reading chapter 2 in two parts. This is part 2. Here, Neil and Ishani, the two detectives, have gone to QSoft, the company where the investigation will go on, and they're right now talking to the HR manager, Dheeraj Seth. Dheeraj looked at her and said, "No offense to women, really. But some women try to prove they are better than men. That is not good thing. Men don't like it. It's a fact of life." Then he turned to Neil and said, "Later I told Lokesh that maybe in the next cycle he would be reporting to another general manager and could get a chance to get promoted. I had to motivate him. Manjari had just not thought about that when she was proving her point about why she had not promoted him." Ishani asked, "Is that a common problem? You needing to handle disappointed people?" Dheeraj made a face and said, "Yes, to some extent. But people like Manjari make our lives difficult. Honesty and all is fine in theory. But if you want people to remain happy, you can't be so blunt about their shortcomings. You have to put a positive spin on it." "Did anyone else have any complaints about her?" Neil asked. Dheeraj thought about it and then replied rather quietly, "No, no one else complained." Ishani looked at the list she had and asked about other managers who had reported to Manjiri. "Well, they never complained to people care team. The overall impression everyone had was that they were happy with her management style. Ajit and Sandeep had been working with her for over 3 years and had got used to her style." Dheeraj paused, but it was obvious that he had more information. It almost seemed like he was trying to decide whether to say anything more or not. Thankfully, he did continue. "Then there is Dilip. She was rather too fond of Dilip. In fact, people talked about it behind her back. It was like she was in love with the guy." After some moments of silence, Dheeraj continued without any prompting. When the promotions were discussed, everyone expected her to make a case for Dilip's promotion, and quite surprisingly, she didn't. But he didn't complain either. When Dheeraj seemed to have said all he wanted to, Neil asked, "How were Manjiri's interactions with your team?" "Like I'd said, she was very aggressive and unforgiving. If someone made a mistake, she would be quick to point out, and then she would want the person to accept the mistake, say it in so many words, not just correct it. She was harsh with my team, exacting. One particular person found it very difficult to work with her." "Who is this person?" Neil asked. "Nisha Khanna. She was scared to work on any project in which Manjiri was involved." Dheeraj talked about Manjiri and her wrong attitude for a few more minutes. Then finally, Neil asked about the mishap. "Dheeraj, now can you please tell us what happened on the night of March 16th?" Dheeraj kept quiet for some time, probably collecting his thoughts. Then he started in a somber tone. "We all went to have dinner around 9 p.m. A buffet had been set up and we ate at leisure. I think it was around 9:50 p.m. when Gautam, Jayant and I went to watch TV at the recreation center. We watched news for some time and then started playing cards when a few other folks stumbled in. When I went to my tent, it was past 1 a.m. I was very sleepy, so I hit the bed right away." "Who were you sharing the tent with?" "Hemant, Manjiri's boss. He had left the reception center earlier in the evening. When I went to my tent, he was already asleep." When did you find out that Manjiri was missing? Asked Neil. Next morning, I was the first one to go for breakfast. I think it was just before 7 a.m. I was chatting with the wild outdoors folks as our team slowly trickled in. We were to start the session at 8 a.m., so everyone was expected to finish breakfast by then. Everyone got there by 7:30 except for Manjiri. When I asked around, no one knew where she was and no one had seen her. Sangita and Manjiri were in the same tent, and so I asked Sangita. The night before, Sangita had gone to bed right after dinner because she had a headache. She said when she got up in the morning, Manjiri was not there. She had assumed that Manjiri had already left for breakfast. Then what happened? Ishani asked in a sympathetic tone. We started searching for her, calling out to her and looking around everywhere. We kept searching for a while, thinking she must be somewhere on the campsite. When we had been searching for over an hour, we began to worry. I tried to call her on her cell phone to see if she would pick up. As expected, her phone was out of reach. The only phone network that worked on the campsite was BSNL. Atul and I were the only two from QSoft who were carrying BSNL phones. Then Jivaji came to me and asked whether we should call the police. On taking stock of the situation, I agreed with him. Jivaji went to local police station and within a short while a police jeep came over followed by a fire truck. Once the police arrived, they took charge. They took a small boat from the shore. One of Jivaji's men, two firemen, along with a constable, got on the boat and rowed in. Some distance from the shore, the firemen dived in. They kept disappearing under the water and coming up for air after short intervals. It seemed as though they were moving in a circle. We were all waiting on the shore. Then one guy shouted, "Here, down here." Before we could understand what exactly he was talking about, he and the other guy both disappeared underwater. In a short while, they came up with and they were holding something. They got on the boat and came back. He paused and then continued. By that time, we had all guessed what was going on. But still, it was quite a shock when they brought Manjiri's lifeless body ashore. It was such a shock. Everyone was stunned and didn't know what to do. Then the police wanted to talk to us, each one of us. When did we see Manjiri last? How well did we know her? Could she swim? And on and on and on. Ishani and Neil kept quiet, waiting for Dheeraj to come out of his memories of that fateful day. Finally, it was Ishani who broke the silence to ask, as per the post mortem, Manjiri had consumed alcohol. Can you tell us about that? Dheeraj looked annoyed and said, QSoft does not allow alcohol on any of its official outings, like this one was. We didn't supply any alcohol and we didn't encourage people to drink. Who else apart from Manjiri had had alcohol that night? Ishani tried a different approach. Dheeraj looked away and said, I don't know. I don't know how Manjiri managed to get alcohol. I didn't see anyone drink. Neil signaled to indicate that she should drop the topic and instead asked, one more question. Do you know if Manjiri was a good swimmer? She was not a good swimmer, but she was taking swimming lessons. She had recently boasted to me about how she was able to swim about 50 feet now, Dheeraj said. Then he added as an afterthought, but Manjiri was rather reckless. She would not have thought about the risks and would have decided to just swim by herself. She was quite capable of that. So, according to Dheeraj, Manjiri was working as a senior position in a big company handling different responsibilities, handling so many senior managers, and yet so reckless that she would not think about the risk of swimming out alone when she wasn't a good swimmer. But if she had intended to swim, wouldn't she have changed into a swimming costume? Asked Neil. Dheeraj shook his head and said she might have decided to go swimming after she went down to the lake, and it would have seemed like too much effort to go back to the tent and change. Anyway, she was in shorts and t shirt, not any flowing clothes. After a couple of minutes, when Dheeraj realized that Neil and Ishani had become quiet and were not asking him any more questions, he asked them if they would like to go to the canteen and have a cup of coffee. Both Ishani and Neil said almost simultaneously. Then they looked at each other and smiled. In the canteen, Dheeraj sat them at a table and went to the counter to get coffee for them. When he was out of the earshot, Ishani said, I was milling over the stuff that Dheeraj mentioned about the three people who disliked Manjiri, a woman, because she was exacting. They found her harsh. Neil looked at her and raised his eyebrows in question. Well, men in her shoes would have been admired for their brutal honesty and focus on quality. Ishani couldn't keep the sarcasm out of her voice. Neil gave her a sardonic look and said, let's keep our feelings about the unfairness of the world out of this. Let us focus on the case and what has happened.